I chose to do my midterm paper on Volkswagen versus the United States government. One of my main reasons in choosing to do this topic is that I actually purchased a Volkswagen diesel only days before they announced the Dieselgate scandal. So I'm currently a member of a class that is waiting to see how Volkswagen is going to deal with these issues. Now, in looking at the diesel versus the United States government, there are actually two federal agencies that are bringing actions against Volkswagen. The first is the Environmental Protection Agency, and the second is the Federal Trade Commissions. Now, the EPA is bringing their action based on the Clean Air Act, while the FTC is bringing their lawsuit based on the Federal Trade Commissions Act. Now, the EPA's main goal is to protect people and the environment from dangerous pollutants, where the FTC, their main goal is to protect consumers. So, VW is sort of stuck between both federal agencies and the suits that are currently pending. Now, although the details of the negotiations between Volkswagen and these federal agencies have not really been made public, a lot of inferences can be drawn based on the litigation and based on the documents filed in the court cases. Now, since both the EPA and the FTC's claims for relief are based on statutory provisions, it appears that Volkswagen is at a disadvantage in terms of the negotiation. Not only does the evidence against VW support the government's contentions that VW broke the law, but VW's own admission seems to place them in an inferior position in the negotiations. VW will almost certainly owe penalties. The question is, how much? VW's goal is to minimize exposure, while the U.S. government wants to squeeze every last dollar out of the company. And some of the numbers have been really high in terms of what VW is facing. In terms of what the EPA is seeking, they've done a calculation where they're estimating about $37,500 for each of the 580,000 affected VW vehicles in the U.S. With other penalties and fines added on to that, VW is facing close to $46 billion in civil penalties just for their violation of the Clean Air Act. This doesn't even get into the fines and penalties that the FTC is seeking, nor does it get into the amount of money that Volkswagen may owe individual state regulators as well as private parties who were affected by this Dieselgate scandal. Now, in both their petitions, which is the court filings that both the EPA and FTC filed with the court in their lawsuits, they paint Volkswagen as deceptive. In their petition, the EPA claims that the Clean Air Act, the aim is to protect human health and the environment by reducing emissions. The EPA goes on to describe the dangers that excessive car pollutants can have on children and those with health conditions. The EPA also describes the environmental harm that results from excessive emissions. The FTC's stated goal is to protect consumers. In their petition, they highlight VW's history of deceiving consumers by referring to their numerous clean diesel ads and comparing it to the actual level of pollutants that the car emits. The FTC uses words such as deceptive, unfair, and dangerous in order to intensify the harmfulness of VW's actions. Both governmental agencies utilize ethos to reinforce the idea that VW's actions were not only unethical, but illegal. Both agencies highlight the amount of money VW has made on the premiums charged for diesel, all while comparing it to the decreased resale value and other costs that consumers are now facing. Although a judge will ultimately decide in both cases, the government seems to be using language that will drum up support for the lawsuit. The more vocal the public is, the more likely that the judge will feel pressure to hit VW with the max penalties. Now, although VW has admitted wrongdoing, they have not fully complied with regulators in turning over all documents. It appears as though VW is purposely omitting information from the government and the public in hopes of minimizing their exposure. Although they expect to face fines, VW's position is that excessive fines will force them to cut jobs in the US and abroad. VW has claimed that these fines will have extensive social costs. What VW is doing is they're attempting to propagandize the imposition of fines in order to reduce their exposure. This use of pathos in VW is VW's attempt to not only gain sympathy from the public, but to push the government away from pursuing such large fines. VW has pointed to their intent to pursue green technology in an attempt to shift the public's attention away from the diesel scandal. It's really their attempt to paint themselves in a better light. Now, one might be tempted to suggest that VW should just allow the suits brought by the US to take their course. However, one must consider the high cost needed to mount a legal defense. Although the government has the most to gain from going forward with these lawsuits, litigation is expensive and very time-intensive for all parties involved. This is likely a major motivating factor for both parties to reach a resolution without the court's involvement. Now, if I were in VW's position, my major focus would be on rebuilding the brand. I would not cite to German law and attempt to withhold documents from the US, as this further angers US regulators. VW should comply with all discovery requests, which could help ease tensions and show that they have a willingness to fix the problem. While VW has a responsibility to its shareholders, it should not totally be concerned with finding the cheapest way to solve this issue, especially when its head executives are still getting multi-million-dollar bonuses. VW needs to take necessary actions to adequately compensate diesel owners and regain consumer trusts if it hopes to continue doing business in the US. Yes, this is going to cost VW a lot of money, but ultimately taking a more collaborative approach with US regulators will cost much less, both in terms of their image and their bottom line.